the truth, no facades. On my grind every day, stay. I'm the truth, no facades. On my grind every day, stay. I'm the truth, no facades. On my grind every day, stay. I'm the truth, I'm the truth, I'm the truth. I flex when I step, self-made, that's a bet. In my zone, feeling blessed, not a clone, I'm unique. Counting wins, not the stress, with success on my crest. Heavy crown, but I'm strong, never bound to defeat. Riding clean, watch me gleam, elevate to extreme. 808s, hit the beat, my reflection's what I meet. Rocking jewels, breaking rules, my own path, power leads. I'm the one taking flight, hottest peak in my sight. I'm the truth, no facades, on my grind.
Meze Audio has usually been known for the higher-end market. Their headphones tend to be on the pricier side. The original Classics headphone was more towards the affordable side, and it certainly became a classic for a lot of people. Recently, Meze has been putting more effort into broadening their budget options. I was very impressed with their first IEM, the Alba, which had a great balance of good build, good design, and good sound for a reasonable price. Now, Meze has released their newest headphone targeted at the more affordable market. This is the 105 Air, the brother to the more expensive 109 Pro. Meze let me borrow the 105 for, let's be honest, a very long time, and I really do appreciate their patience. I've had a lot of fun with this headphone, but is it really worth its $400 price tag? Meze says that the 105 is a lush, sonic oasis. And as marketing goes, this is pretty tame. They say that this is a value-driven headphone designed for all musical genres. The company talks about how wonderful the headphone sounds, but does not make any outlandish claims about its performance, in contrast to some other companies. There's some interesting information on the website about the 105's drivers. If you're interested, I recommend taking a look. Naturally, Meze claims that their driver design will produce low distortion and high resolution, the same stuff every company says, and the type of stuff that Meze has been talking about in all of its other headphones. The only information Meze gives about the sound on this headphone is that it has a, quote, rich and refined signature with, quote, a slight emphasis on the bass and sub-bass region, which would theoretically, according to them, provide a warm and full-bodied quality. There are several frequency response measurements for this headphone, and depending on which one you prefer, you'll get a slightly or significantly different picture. An average survey of the sampled graph suggests a sub-bass roll-off, a very moderate mid-bass boost, and peaks at the 3 to 6 kHz regions. As for build, the 105 is once again a testament to excellent design. Meze know how to make gear, and they clearly put a lot of time and energy into it. The 105 is one of the lightest headphones I've used in quite a while, and it is the lightest headphone Meze had yet released. Its stealth black appearance, frankly, is personally quite catching. Meze uses the same kind of self-adjusting headband that they've had for a long time, particularly on the original Classics. In fact, the headband style is quite reminiscent of both the Classics and the 109 Pro. The ear cups do not swivel much, which could create an issue for some people. Your face, shape, and size will determine how well the 105 fits. For me, it fit just fine. On the other hand, the ear pads are very plush and comfortable. This isn't memory foam, which is a little bit disappointing. To date, among the best ear pad designs I have used are on the Cool Gel memory foam ear pads from the Rode NTH100, which make long listening sessions quite easy. The 105's ear pads are oval and fully engulf my average-sized ears. Unless your ears are larger than average, there really shouldn't be any pinching involved. Having said all of that, I think the 105's clamping force is a little bit on the tight side. It is tighter than that of the HD6XX, Beyerdynamic DT900 Pro X, and Allo Audio X1 and S5X. It's not necessarily uncomfortable on the 105, but neither is it the gentler clamping force of the Lyric or the Empyrean in comparison. Frankly, I needed to take the 105 off my head every 45 minutes to get some relief. This might sound really bad, and for some, maybe it will be. Clamping force plays a role in how you perceive sound. A tighter clamp generally results in a better seal, which can enhance bass response and overall perceived bass impact. And for an open back headphone, tighter clamp can be beneficial. The packaging is fairly sparse, to be honest. You get the headphone, a short cable, and a hard shell case. We've seen companies provide extra ear pads and cables for far less money, and I really wish Meze would start doing that. The perceived value with those added accessories, which really don't add much cost to the company, can help in the long run. Overall, the 105 is a well-made, well-designed headphone. My one issue with it is the clamping force, but that is always going to be a personal preference. Meze provides some fairly vague comments about the sound signature of the 105. They say it is a warm-sounding headphone. Is it? Well, yes, depending on your interpretation of the phrase warm-sounding. The Sony MDR Z7 and MDR Z1 are arguably warm-sounding, as are the HT6XX, 99 Classics, and most Denons. But all of them approach this concept differently. So just because these headphones all may fall into the large category of warm-sounding, that does not mean they sound the same. For my listening test, I used the 105 for several weeks as one of my go-to headphones. I paired it with my RME 80i2 DAC, Matrix Mini I Pro 3, Woo Audio WA7 Fireflies, Eco Zerta ITM03, Low 2 Paw S1, and used it with a variety of digital audio players, including the Sony NWA55. First and foremost, the 105 is easy to drive. You don't need a dedicated headphone amp to enjoy this headphone, and even the A55 has plenty of power to drive the 105. I listen to a variety of music, including my test playlist, which I always use for all of my headphone and IEM reviews. I watch YouTube videos, movies, and consumed all sorts of other content, including audiobooks, using the 105. I put this headphone through the typical daily tasks I usually would with any of my other headphones, and I put it through the same rigorous testing protocols that I do with all of my reviews. That includes constant A/B testing against the 105 and other headphones, some of which will be mentioned herein. The 105's bass seemingly has a sub-bass roll-off. Remember that graph I mentioned? At least, again, that's the graph's suggestion. I don't think that's the actuality, however. There is a roll-off, but it's not as significant as I imagined it might have been having looked at those same graphs. My go-to song for testing this is Mountains by Hans Zimmer. This track has a low rumble from start to finish. The 105 rendered that detail fairly clearly. When I increased volume on my various devices, that rumble only became louder without adding audible distortion. This is a far cry from what the Beyerdynamic DT 1990 does. The 1990 does develop audible distortion at low frequencies with higher volumes, something I mentioned a long time ago. The 105 has a slight mid-bass bump. Drums have audible thumping, but the transients is slightly faster than I've heard on most dynamic driver headphones. Now, it's not similar to a typical planar driver, but it's also not the slower transients of, say, the HT6XX. Drum strikes on the 105 never sound harsh or sharp. They always sound like there's a thin sheet separating my ears from the speakers, absorbing some of that sharper energy. In contrast, the triple driver headphones and the Fostex TH900 have sharper, harder drum strikes. Some of this can also be replicated on the audeze LCD XC. Separation and clarity between sub-bass and mid-bass is rather clear on the 105. It is clearer than what I heard on the HT6XX, the Apos Audio Caspian, the Sony Z7, and hey, how about the Blue MoFi, just to give you a variety of comparisons. The 105's bass clarity, I think, is similar to what I heard on the Allo S5X, which is to say there's plenty of clarity and no muddiness to complain about. When it came to hearing various drums in a group, such as with Kodo's Irodori, the 105 was able to clearly render them all. I heard the small, medium, and large drums as they all played together, and hearing each play slightly differently from each other on the soundstage. The HT6XX tended to blend the drums together, making it harder to hear the differences. Same goes for the Caspian and the Z7. Only the Olo S5X provided similar and maybe slightly greater clarity compared to the 105. The 105's mids are forward, with vocals taking front stage. There is a significant amount of sibilance emphasis on the 105, and when I say significant, I do mean significant. Frankly, it reminds me of the harsh sibilance from the HD560S. The 105 has a bit more control than the 560S, but that peaky nature is really hard to shake. In Orla Gartland's Why Am I Like This, there's natural sibilance mixed in. The 105 clearly presented that and punched it right into my eardrums. Even at lower volumes, this detail was the most prevalent. Orla's voice stood about one step ahead of the other instruments, including the drums. There was fairly good separation of instruments where I could easily make out the drums, guitar, and piano. It was rather interesting to hear them placed in different spots on the soundstage, and at one point I kept hearing the piano coming from the lower left side of the speaker. In Want You Back by Haim, I confirmed that the 105 has a very prominent sibilance emphasis. Once again, even lower volumes were hard on my ears. On the other hand, the 105 easily separated the three vocalists and let me hear their unique tonalities. Even when the instruments played at maximum, those vocalists remained clear and distinct. In comparison, the HD6XX and the Sony Z7 have less clear mids. Vocals and instruments in the songs I listen to always seem to vie for attention on the 6XX and the Z7. On the 6XX, for example, the vocals didn't stand out nearly as much as on the 105. However, the 6XX did not emphasize the sibilance, and the Z7's sibilance emphasis was a few decibels quieter than that of the 105. The Olo S5X had a marginal sibilance emphasis compared to the 105. Separation and clarity in the mids was about as much as on the S5X as on the 105. The 105's treble seemed clear, but at times sharp, particularly in the low to mid treble. In Scherzo for X-Wings, the brass and horns cut through every other group set. They stood out and punched into my ears without any difficulty. Separation of group sets in orchestral tracks was quite good on the 105, and I never had trouble paying attention to any particular set. In contrast, the HD6XX has a gentler approach to treble, more on the neutral side. Treble instruments are still present on the 6XX, but do not dominate and do not sound as sharp as on the 105. The Z7 from Sony has a noticeable treble emphasis, but not quite as sharp as the 105. And the Olo S5X has a neutral rendition of treble, not harsh or piercing. The DT1990 has a fairly peaky treble response, and it is sharper than the 105. In Flight from the City by Johan Johansson, the 105 let me hear the creaking of wood, sizzling background effects, shifting of the cello, all without any difficulty. The piano and cello tended to blend together a little bit, but both retained their distinct signatures. The HD6XX and the Z7 had less clarity, and it was not nearly as easy to hear the details. The Olo S5X provided about the same amount of details and separation as the 105. The 105's soundstage is wider than average, and average for me is the HD6XX. Below average is the Neumann NDH20. Above average is the Hi-Fi Man Sundara and Abentone Planar. And when we get into the super wide soundstage area, then we start talking about the HD800S and the Hi-Fi Man Diva. So, the 105 has a wider soundstage than the HD6XX, but not as wide as the Sundara. As for detail retrieval, I would say that the 105 has very good performance in this regard. As I mentioned throughout this video, the 105 provides good clarity, vocals stand out, and instruments rarely if ever sound muddled or lose their sound signatures when in a group playing together. I think the 105 easily provides obvious and even subtle details. Pops and sizzles, electric buzzing effects, creaking of wood, sharp intakes of breath, cracking of vocals when a singer pushes their voice a little bit too hard. But let's be clear, the 105 is not the HD800S or the Focal Clear or the Austrian audio headphones, all of which are champions where it comes to pure detail retrieval. In my standard listening test using Kazuki's song New Light, I heard 9 to 10 clear footsteps on the 105. Compare that to the HD800S's 22 footsteps, the Focal Clear's 18, the Allo S5X's 10, the Focal Utopia's 10, and even Meze's own 109 Pro's 10 footsteps. In other words, the 105 had a very good showing in this example. Overall, the 105 is not the same warm-sounding headphone you might imagine from listening to reviews about other warm-sounding headphones. It's more detailed than most others that fall into this category. It's more clear. It has more separation of elements. That sub-bass roll-off suggested in some of the graphs really did not impact the 105's performance in reality. I think that tight clamp apparently does benefit. I think the 105 generally does fall into the warm-sounding Uber category, but with caveats. In my view, warm-sounding headphones have a soothing, relaxing signature. They should not be muddy, but they also should not create any discomfort from the music. I really cannot say that is the case with the 105. If you are sensitive to sibilance, then the 105 might be very unwelcome. I don't think the sibilance performance is as bad as on the HD560S, but boy did it remind me of that. And no amount of giving time to acclimate or changing volumes altered that experience. I am not particularly sensitive to sibilance or treble, so if it was near my discomfort, I can imagine how it would impact someone who is totally against that kind of detail. The $400 headphone landscape is pretty deep and wide. We have lots of good options to choose from at $400 and below. My primary suggestions are to first decide your budget, then figure out what sound signature you want, and then stick to those parameters. Brand, where it's made, and hype should become factors only after you have narrowed your initial search. Frankly, I like the 105 Air. It's a good headphone for what it does. I love the design and build. The clamping force is, okay, not my favorite, but I could learn to live with it. I'm really glad that we have an open bag headphone with such good bass performance as we do on the 105. And frankly, that is not easy to find. But you really have to think of this headphone in one major way. Do you like sibilance? If it doesn't bother you, then the 105 I think would be a very good option among the rest of your options that you have to choose from. If it does bother you, then it might be best to look elsewhere. To that end, classics are classics for a reason. The 99 Classics are still excellent headphones, though not nearly as detailed or clear as the 105. The Rode NTH100 has a fantastic blend of performance, neutral sound, and great fit and comfort. The Monoprice HR5, if you can find them, are also great balanced sounding headphones for really cheap. And don't forget the Philips SHP 9500 and 9600, to say nothing of the X2HR and now the very reduced in price X3. I mean, there are lots of good options out there. And if after your research you think that the 105 might not be your cup of tea, well, there's plenty of fish in the sea.